All right. Well, I didn't mean to stir up controversy here about living vine. I didn't mean to do that. All right, let's get. All right, glad you're here tonight. Thanks for coming. I hope we have a good time. We're going to look at another story that we probably think we know, and we're going to learn some things about it, I hope, as we go on. Just as a reminder, we are looking at what happens when the people of Israel go from slavery to the Promised Land. Tonight we are looking at the provision of manna and quail, or as I like to call this story, are we there yet? So let's just remember where we are briefly. God heard the cries of the Israelites, also known as the Hebrews, who are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They had become slaves in Egypt. Here's a slide showing, our familiar slide showing them building fancy storehouses in Egypt. So God comes to Moses in the form of a burning bush, which certainly gets Moses' attention. And he says that God is going to do something about it, which probably sounded really good to Moses, until God tells Moses that what God is going to do is send Moses back to Egypt to tell Pharaoh to let the people go. And that probably didn't sound so good to Moses. If we had read that story, there's a fairly lengthy argument between God and Moses, which eventually is won by God. So Moses goes back to Egypt. And then after Pharaoh refuses to cooperate, refuses to let the people go, Yahweh brings 10 plagues on the Egyptians, the last one of which is commemorated in the Passover meal. The people are able to escape. They cross the Red Sea. Here's my favorite picture of the people of Israel taking selfies as they're walking between the walls of water. They cross the Red Sea. They set out into the wilderness. And with that, let's read Exodus chapter 16, 1 through 15. I think in my notes I said 1 through 18, so I was confused there, but it's 1 through 15. This is on your tables. If somebody would read this for us, please.
The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they are prepare what they are bringing in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other day." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." That evening quail came and covered the camp, and thin flakes like frost from the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat."
Excellent. Thanks, Dave. So the people are out in the wilderness. They're out in the desert. They left on the 15th day of the first month. Now it's the 15th day of the second month. The grammar here is a little bit confusing. But they're 30 or 45 days out of Egypt. And here they are, someplace in between the Red Sea and Mount Sinai. They're in a place called the Desert of Sin, which sounds worse than it is, right? Yes, sin or failure, what I like to call our messed upness, can be a desert, be a dry, parched, lonely wilderness. But the Desert of Sin refers to the desert around Mount Sinai. We talked about last week, people don't agree on exactly which mountain was Mount Sinai, exactly where people crossed the Red Sea. But here, on this map, you can see one proposed, this is one theory about what route they took. And this shows Mount Sinai sort of on the south end of what we now call the Sinai Peninsula, and the Desert of Sin is north of there and around the mountain. Some people think that Mount Sinai is actually further east, in Saudi Arabia someplace. I don't find any theory persuasive, but this is probably the most commonly held one, that Mount Sinai is on the south end of the Sinai Peninsula, and the Desert of Sin would have been just north of there. In any event, they're out in the desert, they're in the wilderness. They've been gone for 30 or 45 days, and this is the third time they've complained. The first time God parted the sea so they could cross and escape the Egyptian army. The second time God provides water. And now they want to go back to Egypt. They are grumbling because they don't have food. The word that is translated as grumbling in the passage that Dave read is also sometimes translated as murmuring. And there's a name for all of these stories that show up throughout Exodus and Numbers. That they're sometimes called the murmuring tradition. All of these stories together. This is actually the second or third one, depending on how you count. But they're grumbling, they're murmuring. They want to go back to Egypt. Exactly where they were begging God to get them out of just a few chapters of the Bible ago. Are they a bunch of whiners? Or are they just really, really hungry? Every time I read this story, I think about my wife and going camping. When I was in college, one summer I had a job where I took urban kids down a river in canoes, and we camped. And I liked camping, and I liked going canoeing. I liked doing those kinds of things. Then I married my wife, and my wife thought that camping was staying at a Sheraton or a Hilton next to someplace that she liked to go for a hike. We did actually go camping together once. She started complaining before the tent was up. Okay. Continued to complain until we were on the way home. And about a month later, she said, that wasn't so bad. I'd go camping again. And I said, not if you want us to be married. We're not doing that again. The other thing I think of is the kind of experience that any parent has had, where you're going someplace with your kids, and how do you react when your kids are complaining for the 81st time in the first 60 minutes you've been in the car? Right. Are we there yet? Right? And if that line, "I'll give you something to complain about," came from someplace, it might have been that 81st time that your kids complain in the first 60 minutes. No, now be quiet and let me drive, right? We're not there. So in verse 3, "If only we had died as slaves where we sat by the flesh pots of Egypt and ate our fill, at least we wouldn't have died hungry." Back in chapter 2, the people's cry rose up to God. God stepped in to save them, set them free from slavery. Now here they are complaining that they'd rather be back as slaves in Egypt. The people are looking backwards wearing rose-colored glasses. They're nostalgic for something that never really existed, a past that never was. I think that's the way nostalgia works. Anybody here a fan of 80s era country music? There was a country singer named John Conley who had a song called "Rose-Colored Glasses," and I love this line. "These rose-colored glasses that I'm looking through show only the beauty because they hide all the truth."
Yeah.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, great song and a great line. So, as a parent, I would have been tempted to go with the "I'll give you something to complain about" line, but God doesn't do that. Out in the wilderness, God doesn't respond with anger or frustration. God responds with provision. God provides quail and manna. And here we have a slide showing the people collecting manna outside their tents. Now you might ask, what is manna? The word manna could actually be literally translated as, "What is it?" Which I think is hilarious. What is it? And I've seen several theories about what it is. Some people think that manna was actually secretions, edible secretions, that kind of tasted sweet from desert insects. I heard somebody say, "Ooh." right, okay. Some people think it's a form of lichen. Some people think it's a form of dew that fell off of particular desert plants, which then, when it dried, would create something that was edible. Some people just think God did it. And again, there's several theories about exactly what it was. I don't know.
Say,
Yes.
excuse me, but then what was the significance of the quail?
That was meat.
The quail was meat.
That was meat.
The quail was meat. And what's amazing about providing meat was that meat would have been a holiday meal, a treat. It would not have been an everyday thing. So it's showing how abundant God's provision is. There's this bread-like substance that's apparently sort of sweet, even if we don't know exactly what it is. And there's meat for the people.
They had to kill it.
Yes, they did have. Yes, they did have to catch them and kill them. That's true.
Well, if there was an abundance of them, it probably wasn't easy.
It could have been, yeah. So, as I'm reading this story, I think about how surprisingly honest the writers of the Old Testament are about their people. One of the ways to understand the Old Testament is the story of God's people continually wandering away, and God continually goes after them and brings them back. God continually makes things right. But that isn't the way most of us like to tell our story, right? We usually tell stories in a way that makes us the heroes. We try to shift or deny blame. Instead of, here's all the bad stuff that I did, here's all the bad stuff that happened to me, right? It's a more interesting story if a bunch of bad stuff happened to you and somehow you survived. But as the Old Testament is being put together, plus or minus 900 years after Moses, the writers or the editors who are deciding which stories are going to go in the Old Testament are honest. They're really honest about the human condition and about their ancestors. These stories tell the truth. It's not just, here's all the bad stuff that happened to us, although there's some of that. It's also, look how messed up we were. We would, at this point in the story, our ancestors would have rather been slaves in Egypt than have been free. And it's funny, most societies or social groups spend a lot of time defending their tribe. We like to come up with a pristine version of our history. I like to think that the Norwegians and the Danes were always right and it was always the Swedes' fault.
Wait a minute. I'm listening.
All right. And we like to clean the stories up a little bit to make sure that we look like the good guys. Remember the Boston Tea Party? Those guys were either patriots and freedom fighters, or we would call them today domestic terrorists, depending on who won the Revolutionary War. George Washington was a good guy, but he wasn't a saint. The story in which he says, "I cannot tell a lie," when he's asked about chopping down a cherry tree, that story's made up. It's a legend. It's not a true story. Think about the Palestinians and the Israelis who are bombing and shooting rockets at each other this week. They both tell a story in which their side is oppressed, or the heroes, and the other side is the villains. And it goes back long enough, I'm sure most of them don't actually remember who did what to who first. But instead of making up stories to make their own people look good, the writers of the Old Testament, and for that matter the New Testament, are pretty darn honest. Adam and Eve, the first people, mess up. Abraham, who is the first patriarch of the Jewish people, has a child with his wife's servant, then sends both the servant and the child away because his wife is jealous. Jacob, with help from his mother, steals from his brother and tricks his father. The people of Israel can't stay faithful for a month or 45 days after Yahweh sets them free from slavery and oppression in Egypt. So this story really tells the truth about the human condition, and these people who have a bad case of nostalgia.
Especially when you consider that he parted the Red Sea. That's pretty significant. That would get my attention.
Yeah. If you think about what's happened so far, right? You might think they would quit grumbling and be okay with what's going on. On the other hand, they're hungry. Yeah.
Well, it seems like the more they grumble, the more God does for them.
Okay. And that.
I can't find that true in
Yeah.
life.
Right. Yeah. And that shifts at some point. In the murmuring tradition, in the early stories, they grumble and God steps in. As it goes on, God is less, I was going to say amenable, that's not quite the word I mean, but yeah. God is less responsive to their complaining as the stories go on. But this story, and the entire Exodus story, isn't about looking backwards with rose-colored glasses, which is what the people were doing. The story is about the future that God had in store for Israel because he keeps the promise alive by feeding them. And it's also about the future for us. It's about a future in which we can trust God to provide. The people can't have the past the way they wanted it to be. They can't go back. But they're invited to step into a future where they're going to trust God. And God acts. God provides what they need. In a time of risk and desperation, God provided sustenance, God provided care. God kept them alive at this point in the story to get them to Sinai. Yahweh provides more than adequate food, abundant food, when it might have seemed like nothing was going to be available. Meat was a rarity in their diet, as I said. The manna appears daily. They ate, they were satisfied, and there was enough And here Yahweh gives abundantly, gives generously. The people are dependent on the Lord, and He comes through for them. And this reminds me of creation, because in the creation story, the Lord blesses and cares for everything that He's made. And He transforms a world that is formless and void, a world that's full of chaos, into a world that's full of life, full of possibilities and joy, and a world in which there's enough for everybody. So when was the manna available? When did they get it? In the morning?
In the morning.
And they get it every day except the Sabbath. And they can't hoard it. If they try to hoard it, it goes bad, right? So they need to trust every day that God is going to provide for them. For 40 years, every day God provided them with enough. As I said, as the story goes on and the murmuring continues, God starts responding in different ways to that, but God always provided. Okay. We like to make plans. We like to figure out how to make everything work out. And in a society like ours, where we have wealth and we have resources that would have been undreamed of just decades ago, it's pretty easy to trust those plans, right? At one point, my Thrivent agent, who I think was trying to sell me life insurance, asked what risks there were that I wasn't going to be able to reach my financial goals by the time I retired. And I think my answer was worldwide economic collapse. Okay, my plans are probably not quite that certain, right? Right, but I think that was what I said, you know. So it's probably too easy to trust our plans, and it's sometimes too easy to trust our own hard work to carry them out when things aren't always in our control. Sometimes we run into situations for which we couldn't have planned and for which we couldn't have written a script to follow. When that happens, we have to take it one day at a time, like the people of Israel had to do out in the desert. They had to take it one day at a time. There's going to be manna on the ground in the morning, one step at a time. And then we have to trust God to provide what we need. You know, in the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Give us this day our daily bread." We don't say, "Could I be set for life?" We say, "Give us this day our daily bread today." And we trust God to provide what we need. We can choose to look back through rose-colored glasses at what we think life was like before, or we can walk every day trusting God. So, as I said, as the story goes on, as they murmur, God's response seems to change a little bit the more they murmur. By Numbers chapter 11, for example, they're sick of manna. they want something else to eat. And in hard times, maybe what God provides is barely enough. I was struck. I spent almost 12 years in San Bernardino in a congregation that was based in what was one of the poorest neighborhoods in San Bernardino. And I was struck by people who were on the verge of homelessness or standing in line to get food, to get, a bag of free food. When you ask them how they're doing, they're saying, "I'm blessed." They understood that God was still providing for them. So in hard times, when what God provides is barely enough, we could say we're blessed, or we could wake up and say, "What, manna again? Am I going to have spaghetti one more time, or am I going to have macaroni one more time?" But at the same time, we can thank God for the manna, and we can thank God for what God provides. So let's do some discussion questions. There are on the sheet of paper with discussion questions. You'll see there are 2 sets. If you would do the set of discussion questions for Exodus, take about 10-15 minutes on this, and then again, if each table would report back with something that you talked about that was valuable, insightful, or had good questions. We'll take about 15 minutes for that.